If you've been following along with our Test Drive Garage series, you'll know that I traded my 1997 Chrysler Intrepid that I had for about 45 minutes for a Ford Focus wagon. And I figure since it's been about 3 months since I bought it, and I've only driven about 190 kilometers on it, it's time we do a full episode on it. Our spotlight is on my 2006 Ford Focus ZXW SE. The first generation Ford Focus replaced the Escort and was part of Ford's global vision to create one vehicle for all markets. However, that didn't really go that way, as we really got sloppy seconds. The European spec Ford Focus was released for a 1998 model year and ran until 2004 with a facelift in 2002. The North American version was released in 2000 and ran until 2007, and we got our facelift in 2005, a full year after the European version ended production, so we really got the old version quite a bit later. Now, the European Mark 1.5, which this technically would be, it's a Mark 1.5 North American spec. Eurospec had the options to have xenon headlights, navigation, digital climate control, a wood effect trim, and the RS Sport version. Here in North America, we maybe got leather seats, if it was available. Now, our facelift added the updated front end lights, a rear design, and a new gauge cluster, and small changes on the inside. It's easy to tell if you look at mine. It looks a lot like the Ford 500 or other vehicles sold by Ford around the start of the 2000s, whereas the pre-facelift had turn signals in the grille area with slightly different fog lights below. So it's easy to tell between that. The rear ends are a little bit harder to tell. The facelift also added the ZX designations depending on the body style. The ZX3 was a 3-door hatchback, ZX4 for a sedan, ZX5 for the 5-door hatchback, and mine, the ZXW, for the wagon. There were also 3 regular trims sold, the S, SE, and SES, and then here in North America we got the ST Performance version on some models. Now, since mine is a 2006, I just want to focus on this and what would have been the succeeding model year. So 2006 added the CD or MP3 player standard across the board, except for the wagon, though mine does have it. There was an optional 6 CD changer with steering mounted controls and a street appearance package. Now, 2007, Ford dropped the ZX designation, so I don't know, they really only had it for a couple of years. But as of 2007, they would not have it. It's the easiest way to tell if it's an 07 without looking at the VIN. Now, the wagon, which we have, came as either an SE or the SES. You could not really get the base model. The SE added air conditioning, the overhead console, which added a place for your sunglasses or garage door opener, a CD, FM, AM radio, power mirrors, power windows, power locks, and the remote keyless entry. So not bad overall for what I have here. The SES would have added a tilt telescoping steering wheel with leather, a tachometer, a deck lid spoiler, and 16-inch alloy rims. So some nice things there would have been nice to have, but what can you do? We've got the more or less base model for the wagon. Powering my Ford Focus wagon is a 2-liter Duratec 20 dual overhead cam inline-4 engine, produces 136 horsepower and 136 pound-feet of torque. Again, not too bad for a mid-2000s compact vehicle. It has a 4-speed automatic transmission with overdrive and came as front-wheel drive only. Now, we'll go around some of the interior stuff when we jump on for our road test, but for the most part, it's a Ford Focus wagon. It's not super exciting, but fit in line with other compacts sold at the time, like the very popular Honda Civic. Now let's jump in, take it on a road test, and go over everything else you might need to know if you're really crazy and want to buy a 15-year-old Ford Focus. The Ford Focus. This is the second Ford product I've owned, and both of them have the same issue when it comes to a gear selector indicator. Same with this and my 1983 LTD Crown Victoria. When you put it into a specific gear, say drive, the indicator is not in the right place. This one goes into drive, but once you go into neutral, it stays there. So if you're in reverse, for example, or park, it just says that you're in neutral. My Crown Victoria was off by about 1.5 inches. So depending on, if you went into like what would be showing as first, it was actually drive, and if you were in reverse, then you were in, second, whatever. The point is that didn't line up. This doesn't line up. I guess it's a common problem when it comes to Fords. But let's talk about the Focus. It's a strange car. This is really the only time I've purchased a car that I haven't driven it. I have driven exactly 110 kilometers as of filming this, and I will probably have driven another 5 or 6 kilometers by the time I'm done filming this driving segment. It's not a whole lot. Why is that? Well, it's my line of work, right? For the most part, I'm busy driving other cars all the time. I don't have time to drive my own. And I originally bought this car thinking I'd use it as a leave behind when I go and pick up a press car. Sometimes I have to go in between different manufacturers to pick up something new. And with everything going on with the Corona, I wasn't really tempted to take a taxi or an Uber. So I figured I'd buy this and just leave it in Montreal. But I've essentially been at the same manufacturer now since whenever we started back up, May. So this car's just been sitting around. This is the first time in, I don't know, 5 weeks that I've actually driven it, more than just moving it from one garage to another. But I did like it. Yeah, it grew on me. It wasn't the car that I wanted. I really wanted the Intrepid. That car wasn't great. It was really bad. So I bought this, and here we are. So let's talk a little bit about the interior. It's simple. If you've sat in any mid to late 2000s compact vehicle, it's going to be familiar. There's nothing exciting about it. The one nice plus, at least for the Canadian models, we do have front heated seats. It's either on or off, but still it is nice to have. We're getting into the fall months, and soon we're going to have winter here in Quebec, so it is nice to have heated seats on a essentially base model like this. So that's a nice plus to have. It does have air conditioning, though it doesn't really work. I did have some issues with the HVAC control knobs when I bought the car. I seem to have fixed that, but the air conditioning still isn't great. On a day like today where it's about, I think it's about 8 or 9 degrees Celsius outside, really doesn't matter, but I am always a warm person, so I actually do have the air, not air conditioning on, but the airflow on. It's simple. I know the European specs were nicer. Digital climate control is a pretty nifty thing. Navigation, cool stuff to have. Hell, a tachometer would be pretty cool on this trim, but I don't have it. To be fair though, driving an automatic, I guess you don't really need it, but still, you know, part of me would really like to have one. I think the big bummer on this is the steering wheel, okay? It's nice having power locks and power windows and the keyless entry. Those are all nice to have, but without having that tilt telescoping steering wheel, I mean, like, come on. It's a bit of a bummer because I'm seated in an all right position, but I wouldn't say that it is ideal for what I'm doing. I would like to push it up a little bit. I don't know if it's something that I can retrofit down the road, but yeah, if you have an opportunity to buy an SES, definitely go for that. Space and seating comfort in this is pretty decent as well. You know, the seats here are a little rough. You could have gotten leather. I'm not sure how it was optionable because it wasn't on a specific trip. So I suppose if you had an SES, it was an option on that to get the leather seats. I don't think any of the wagons, at least sold here in Canada, had leather. I've looked online, a lot of these, I take a look at the come up, and I've also been to the junkyards, and the only ones that I found in leather were either sedans or the 5-door hatchback. So again, retrofitting the leather into this might be a little tough, but maybe somebody out there knows a little bit more. Again, because I haven't driven this car and I haven't really done anything with it, I haven't gotten into the Ford Focus community the same way that I have with every other car that I've purchased, where I really get involved. And I hope I can get to that point. It's just, you know, it's a weird car for me. I still haven't really fallen for it the way that I have with other cars. So if you know a little bit more about it, let me know in the comments below. You know, I've even looked at getting the fog lights on this. It seems like a much more complicated process than it really ought to be. So maybe adding things like that is just too much of a cost, especially when the car is in fantastic shape. So what about the drive, ride, and handling? Well, it's a compact car from 15 years ago. It's not great, but it's not awful. It does need a little bit of suspension work. I thought I was going to get that done when I went to the dealership about a month ago. I believe it was about 5 or 6 weeks ago, I guess, when I took it in. And I had told them that I wanted to get these, you know, suspension parts fixed on it. I guess they didn't quite understand because they only did the brake job on this car. So the car does stop, which is nice, but you can still feel that when you take a turn, there's some bumping when it comes to the steering system. So I think if that gets fixed, if I could do something with that, it would be a lot better. But, you know, for the most part, it actually rides pretty well. It is decent. Yeah, I keep saying that because these cars new, I think they were about $15,000 US at the time, so 2005 money. Wasn't overly expensive, and I know that the Focus has crept up in price. If you were to buy one of the last ones, the 2018s, you know, you would have been looking at upwards of the $29,000 price point, at least Canadian for it. You got a lot more with it, but still, it's a cheap enough car. Today, though, you're going to be spending, I don't know, like $4,000 max on one of these, and that's like for an ST with all the options. You know, this one I got for $800, and for the most part, the ones that I see for sale here in Quebec are about $1,000. The nicest one is a 2007 wagon down in Granby. It's for sale with also low enough mileage, but it was the SES, and they're asking about $2,400 for it. So you're not paying a whole lot for it. You get what you pay for. I mean, it's not a fantastic drive or ride. Road noise is, you know, it's up there. It's not excessive, but it's what you would expect at the price point. So you're getting what you're paying for. But it's not unenjoyable. I really have been surprised. This little car has shown me that even at the cheap end of things, you can still get something that's not too bad. Would I recommend the first generation, either the Mark 1 or Mark 1.5 Ford Focus? Maybe not so much if you're in Quebec, because pretty much every single one that I have found for sale has significant rust issues, much like we more or less tackled when we did our video last on Test Drive Garage. I did clean up some of the exterior, you know, visual rust issues, but yeah, the frame does have some small imperfections. There is some rust going on there, and honestly, the other cars in Quebec are all the same. We're in a very bad area for salt, specifically back in the 2000s when they were using a lot more salt on the roads. These cars got obliterated. So you might not necessarily want to buy one here in Quebec unless you have taken a look at it, you put it up on a lift and everything looks good underneath, then you should be in business. But for the most part, it's actually a pretty decent car. They seem to be reliable enough. The engine, while it is, you know, somewhat underpowered for today's standards, wasn't too bad back in 2006. So there's no complaints there. And from what I've read online, you know, the Duratecs are pretty good. There aren't too many issues with it. My check engine lights on for a random, you know, emissions leak somewhere in the system. That's something that, you know, maybe a shade tree mechanic could figure out on their own. The most important thing is to have a smoke test machine to be able to see where that leak is coming from. But it's not a very complicated engine, so you could work on it yourself. I do plan on doing more to it than just the exterior bodywork that I did a little while ago. So I'm planning on fixing up some of the stuff, which you could do on your own. So it's a decent enough car for price, gets the job done, especially in the wagon. I've got a lot of space in here, works out well. Ride and handling is good along with the performance. You're just not going to stand out, depending on where you are though, because I did post some photos of this in the Wagon Owners Club of Canada on Facebook, and I was actually surprised people were pretty interested in it because they sold them here in Quebec, but across the rest of Canada, these are kind of hard to come by in wagon form. As I always recommend whenever you're buying a used car, to have it inspected by a trusted mechanic. Go over everything about it, because there are some small common issues, electrical problems. The gauge cluster, for one, might have some random issues where when you turn off the car, for example, the check engine light will remain on even though the car's not on. That's an issue with the circuit board on the back of the gauge cluster. It gets corroded over time. You might find some electrical issues here and there, and again, the rust, depending on where you're buying the car, will be a problem. But when I look at common issues for the Ford Focus Mark 1 1.5, it's not too bad. You know, with this engine, it gets the job done. I've been impressed. The ones that I find online, aside from the rust, they all pretty much work like they did when they drove off the factory showroom. So if you're looking for something that isn't ancient, has most of the features that you want, you know, power windows, locks, and a remote key, and you want the space that comes with the wagon, then I wouldn't exclude the Ford Focus. It's not bad. Just do your research first. Make sure you're buying a decent one to start off with.